Hello, welcome. Welcome to the final Project Green Forum for the spring of 2010. Springs go by so fast, and we have great weather out there today, don't we? Today is a very special day. We are going to have a speaker that is sponsored by Eco Iowa City. But before we get into that, I just wanted to welcome you on behalf of the library and Project Green. And I wanted to remind you that our Project Green Garden Forum, which is our big plant sale, is going to take place on May 8th at the Carver Hawkeye Arena, beginning at 9 o'clock in the morning and going only from 9 o'clock till 11:30. So if you don't have that on your calendar, you might want to get it on there. We also have our garden tour. The Project Green Garden Tour will be on July 11th. And so one more date to put on your calendar. That's a great garden tour, and we have some wonderful gardens this year. We have door prizes that we're going to be giving today when we have our refreshment time. And so if you want to be eligible for a door prize, be sure that your name is in the Tupperware container that's on our back table. I guess that's all I have to say. I just want to make sure that everybody feels welcome. Oh, the questions and answers. Yeah, if you have papers and pen or pencil on your seat, those are for writing questions that you might have come to mind during our presentation today. And because our audience at home is not able to hear questions that are given directly from the audience, so it's easier if we read those questions into the microphone. So be sure and jot down your questions. You may have some. It's just going to be a wonderful presentation. Now I'd like to introduce Maeve Clark, and Maeve has been in charge of Eco Iowa City, and it's a wonderful project, and I'm sure she'll explain a little bit more about it.
Thank you, Melanie, and I'm not the only person in charge. Eco Iowa City is a grant that the Iowa City Public Library and the Public Works Department, particularly the Iowa City Landfill and Recycling Center, got through the International City County Managers Association. And in the back is Jen Jordan. She is the recycling coordinator for the city of Iowa City, and she is the other co-director, and with her is Hannah Fleck, who is our student intern. And we have been out and about since, probably last March. It's an 18-month-long grant, and we've done lots of things. We were at lots and lots and lots of farmers markets handing out baking soda, and you probably saw us if you were at the Saturday farmers markets handing out baking soda. And we also did some promotions of compost, and we'll be doing that again. There is some material in the back about composting. Jen, compost isn't ready yet, is that right? It will be ready early May, but it's fantastic compost, so look to the Iowa City landfill for that. And speaking of the landfill, Jen will be doing a presentation here, back here in this room, on the 13th of April about waste reduction and recycling in the city of Iowa City. And then next Saturday, I know this is exciting, but next Saturday you can take a tour of the landfill. Yes, yes, you can. There are two options. There's one at 11 o'clock and there's one at 1 o'clock, and it's really an interesting thing to do. And you can find out where all your recycling goes, what the city and the county do to keep waste in the right place. And then at the end of the landfill tour, you can go to the salvage barn, which is also a partner for Eco Iowa City. And I wanted to thank Project Green, because Project Green was one of our very first supporters of our Eco Iowa City grant. In fact, they wrote a letter of support for us. So this is really wonderful. It's like the culmination of a lot of work that we have done together. But enough about Eco Iowa City and about the grant. Except, if you didn't pick up one of these, it has events for Earth Month, which is what we've renamed April, and it actually goes all the way through May 8th. So do pick up one of these and see what's going on. This program will be added to the Iowa City Public Library's collection, so if you know people who couldn't come today and they want to see it, which I'm sure they will, you can tell them to look forward to it in our collection, and they'll be able to borrow it. And like many of the other programs we have on the Library Channel 10, we will re-air it. So Bob will be there for months and years to come. And speaking of Robert Hendrickson, let me give you a brief introduction. Bob was born and raised in Dodge, a small town in northeast Nebraska. He attended the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, UNL, and graduated with a degree in natural resources while working as a landscape assistant at UNL Botanical Garden and Arboretum. After supervising an area of campus, he moved to become curator of the State Fair Park Arboretum. Currently, Bob is the Assistant Director of Horticultural Programs with the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. His responsibilities include coordinating the Great Plants for the Great Plains program and to acquire, propagate, and produce native and exotic plants for distribution and evaluation to NSA members and affiliated arboretum sites. A Nebraska certified nurseryman and a certified arborist with the International Society of Arboriculture, Bob also co-hosts a gardening talk show on Lincoln radio station. He and his wife, Denise, live in Lincoln with 4 young boys and 2 little dogs. And a cat. Good. So without further ado, let me turn this over to Bob.
Thank you very much. Does this work? Is it working? Yes? Really? I can't hear it. You guys can. That's all that matters. All right. Well, thank you very much for the warm welcome. I'm so happy to be here. I actually had to drive through Ottumwa on my way to get here, so I kind of took a roundabout to get here. Needless to say, last time I was in Iowa, I was in a fender bender, so I'm hoping to get out of Iowa City without a fender bender. I had to retrieve some things out of the car that's still at the tow truck driver's place in Ottumwa, so I had to do a little roundabout to get up here. So it enabled me to go south and back north again and enjoy the beautiful day and the beautiful drive. But I imagine heading home tonight, I'm going to get a little sleepy by about Des Moines, so I'll have to pull over and revive myself. Well, thank you for coming. I know this must have been hard for you guys. I could even hear something this morning like, this guy better be good. Right? Admit it? Well, I like to say, first of all, it's not me. It's not me at all. It's about the plants. And you guys being gardeners, you know that too, right? That's why you garden. It's not about you, but trying to impress your neighbors or be the best or the biggest or the first on the block to have this plant, right? Well, maybe it is a little bit. But it is you love plants, and so do I. And that's really what the Great Plants is about. It's a plant promotion program, simple as that. And basically, a lot of states have plant promotion programs. You notice that? You know, but most of them come from out east. And most of the gardening articles written, the gardening information we receive comes from out east. You know, we're kind of seen in these flyover states, and I think in gardening it kind of happens the same way. So what we wanted to do, this program started back in 1998, and I wasn't there at the time when they started this up, but basically the founding fathers and ladies that put this together wanted promote plants that are hardy, adaptable for the Great Plains. Now, technically, Iowa City isn't in the Great Plains. You guys realize that, right? Depends who you talk to, though. For some, the Great Plains ends basically in, even Lincoln, Nebraska isn't a part of the Great Plains to some. It basically ends around the Grand Island area or central Nebraska and goes to the Front Range and all the way up to Ontario, down to the panhandle of Texas. But that doesn't mean the Great Plants program, the Great Plains program, can't be adapted all over the country. What we're trying to do is come up with a group of plants that are sustainable, that are basically plants that once you get them established don't provide a lot of input. And that's what sustainable means to me, because it's harder to find sustainable to a lot of folks out there. But basically to me it means I can grow a plant without having to put a lot into it. It's taking care of itself. My input is I got to pull the weeds today. Just because they're great plants doesn't mean weeds don't come around them, right? I thought you said this was such an awesome plant. Well, it doesn't prevent weeds. But if we garden a certain way, we can certainly prevent those weeds from coming in. How many of you folks are interested in gardening more with prairie plants, natives? How many are? Quite a few. We can do more. And I'll show you some of those plants in here, but I want to also dispel any myths that the Great Plants for the Great Plains doesn't say Great Plants for the native Great Plains, native Great Plants. We have some exotics in there. But the plants we have looked at have been tested. Some of them, we have woody plants that haven't even been released yet that are 15 years still looking at them. And we're not looking at them because they're dropping seedlings all over the place. We just want to see, are they in it for the long haul? Can you hang your hat on that tree, if you will? But a lot of our releases that have come through the program have been, you're going to hear a couple names a lot. One is Harlan Hammernick. You guys familiar with Bluebird Nursery? in Clarkson, Nebraska, our top wholesaler, really the region's top wholesaler, in my opinion. And the Bluebird Nursery carries all of the great plant selections. They're wholesale, meaning you could convince your retailer, if there's any retailers here, you could convince your local garden centers to start carrying some of these because they are harder to find, guys, I'm not going to lie. And you may go down and not be able to find any of these. Or prairie plants, right? They're harder to find too. Thankfully, you guys in Iowa are ahead of us. I mean, you got Iron Exchange at least, providing a wonderful resource. And I've ordered plants from Iron Exchange. You guys familiar with them over in Harpers Ferry? Great company, good stuff. They grow good plants. So there's sources out there for us to get these plants. And knowing you guys as gardeners, you don't stop when you don't find it a certain place, right? You keep looking. So I encourage you, if you don't find the great plants, do keep looking. Okay, so you guys are going to get ready for your questions, so I don't have to worry about answering any as we go along. But if you want to, feel free to ask any questions. So there's basically our mantra there, promoting plains-proven plants for beautiful landscapes. And you see our goal. You can call them superior, depends, right? I mean, are plants really superior? Come on. I mean, is every plant perfect? No. What I like to say is we're not selling carpeting and wallpaper here. We're not selling toasters. These are living things. Living things live and die, right? So we as gardeners got to learn how to use them correctly in the garden to slow down that dying and bring up that living, right? Okay, and we promote plants that show superior qualities for the Great Plains landscape while fulfilling your desire for well-adapted plants. Why great plants? Because it seems to me every year I can pick up a catalog and you can guarantee there's going to be another red maple cultivar out there. There's probably going to be another, well, until ash got slammed in the door, there probably would have been another ash cultivar every year. Now think of perennials. What do you guys expect to see new this year? New hosta, new daylily, new rose, right? Oh, how about coral bells? Are they picking on those? Whew, puppy dogs. Echinacea. Gag me with a spoon. Now, how many folks are having success with all those different echinaceas? I really want to know. Couple? How many different varieties you growing?
Actually, I picked up a couple of varieties from Iron Exchange. I don't know if they're new varieties.
They're probably not. If Iron's carrying them, they're natives. That's why they're doing so well. But all those others, now I'm not saying they're bad, I just haven't bumped into anybody who's had a lot of success with them. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing for me to say. Quite frankly, I don't care, because until somebody proves me wrong. I mean, it's like they have these flashy, glossy ads for these, quite frankly, they made them look like pom-poms, or it doesn't even look like a coneflower anymore. Yet Pallida, the pale purple coneflower, could have been one you picked up from Ion, one of my favorites. And yet, what they've been doing to it is the falls, they have to come straight out or it doesn't matter. They can't be wispy and hanging down and dancing in the slightest breeze, God forbid. We can't do that. So anyway, what we're after is a new palette of plants. Because even though a lot of these are natives, they're still exotic to us because we haven't seen them in gardens, right? And we think of natives as what we see in the road ditch. Well, for Nebraska, our Department of Roads, a lot of what they're planting are European plants because the seed's available and it's cheap. So people think chicory's native, or, on and on, Dame's Rocket, on and on and on. Okay, there's our website. I encourage you to visit it. We've got a lot of good plant information on there. You can learn about just what is the Nebraska Statewide Arboretum. Who are they? We're unique in the country. No other state has this type of system. We're affiliated with the University of Nebraska and recently merged with the Nebraska Forest Service. We're our own private nonprofit organization, but supported very minutely. In fact, we just got our state budget cut this last year, so we have to be completely self-sufficient. Even though they didn't kick us out the door, they're going to let us stay in our place on campus, but we have to earn enough through memberships, plant sales, all these other grants to keep ourselves sustainable. But on there you can find a lot of good information. And there's the Great Plants page that you can find on there, and you can look up ahead of time. If you're a retailer or you want to know what's coming out next year, we have a listing 3 years in advance. And that's for the nurseries mainly, so they know what's coming out and they can prepare and get it going. So that's what we're looking for with our plants of the year. We have if you picked up that magazine, you see the front of it, that's our plants of the year. These are plants that are already in the trade. They've been They've been in the U.S. horticultural industry for decades, yet some reason they're not finding their way into gardens, and for a variety of reasons. Slow-growing plants have a hard time finding their way into gardens. Why do you suppose that is? Nursery doesn't make any money is one, right? Why are you going to grow something that takes 3 years to get this tall maybe, and it doesn't necessarily have the pot appeal that they want? Customer walks right by it, picks up that fancy schmancy coral bells, and walks out the door. And then this ugly little plant in the pot that is going to grow into a beautiful plant, but it just doesn't have that pot appeal. We'll walk right past it. So I don't blame the nursery industry for not carrying natives. It's because we have been tuned to that instant gratification. Okay, so we've got plants of the year. How can you just promote a perennial of the year? Now, Perennial Plant Association, they do a great job. And the perennials they generally promote have been around for a while. You guys are aware of that if you pay attention to the Perennial Plant Association. I think this year's Baptisia australis. Haven't we been there, done that? But they got to be safe, you know. It's got to do good throughout the country. It's got to be readily available, easy to propagate, blah, 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 all those things. Well, what we decided, let's have different categories. The landscape, after all, is holistic, right? We've got the overstory trees, the understory trees, the shrubs, the perennials, on down to the ground cover. So what if we promote every year so people know there's something new and exciting to learn about every year? A new tree, a new shrub, a new perennial, a new ornamental grass. And I'm not saying new as in these are new to horticulture. I'm just saying they're overlooked. How many folks are planting yellowwood? Ooh, we got a couple, 3. See, that's why we pick a tree like this. We have 3 in the room, and how old is your yellowwood?
Well, I planted it about 8 years ago.
So it's 8 years, so it's starting to come into its own.
Yeah.
Do you like the tree?
Yeah, I love them, but I don't live there anymore.
Oh, okay. I didn't want, she said she loves the tree, but she doesn't live there. But you can drive by and look at it and admire it? Okay. Now, who else had a yellowwood? Somebody else? How about yours?
We sold the house and the new owners cut them down.
What is this? This isn't that tree that turns purple in the fall. Okay, what? 3 years only. So, and when you plant them, you probably were like me. Why am I doing this? Because here's a tree in the nursery that you would walk right by, because they kind of look like ugly ducklings in the nursery. That's why they never made the trade, because it doesn't look like a tree when you walk by. But every year you have that tree, you're going to say, dang, I'm glad I planted that tree. They're medium size. You're looking at about a 35 by 35 foot tree there. This is on UNL's campus. And correct me if I'm wrong, it should be native to Iowa, at least eastern Iowa. Is that right? No?
They've done
Well,
well.
they certainly have done well in Nebraska, so I know they'll do well for you. I didn't get a chance to look it up before I came to see if it's Iowa native. I'm pretty sure it is. Well, one of the reasons I like it is Michael Durr describes it as dripping white rain when it's in bloom. Patience, your 7-year-old tree may not even have bloomed yet. It takes a number of years to get there, but then in full bloom, the whole tree looks like it's dripping white rain. And I've seen that before. It was one of those drive-bys where, camera, oh well, what am I going to do? You know, and they smell sweet as well. Wisteria-like, huh? Wouldn't you describe it as? And then in the fall, just a nice golden clear yellow on this plant. And I love it for its bark. The bark's as smooth as a baby's bottom. And then over here on the right, that actually, a certain species of lichen gets attracted to that plant, and those are lichen markings you're seeing on that bark. And that tree there on the right is growing in far northeast Nebraska, so zone 4 up there. And I was tickled to see it doing so well. And notice this multi-stemmed, he's growing it more like a shrub. And they have the included bark that makes arborists really nervous. You see how they have those tight crotches there? And people say, oh, they get beat up in ice storms. But I've talked to an extension agent down in Oklahoma. I've talked to folks around Lincoln. I've observed the trees. I don't see our ice storms and snowstorms busting them up like you would suspect. So strong crotch angle despite the fact that it's a V crotch angle. And then conifer of the year. This is a relatively new category. If you look on there, I think we only have 3 now. This is number 3, I think, or 2 even. No, this is number 3. Swiftstone Pine. So the reason we decided to do a conifer of the year, you guys have problems with pine wilt, right? and Diplodia tip blight on your Austrians, right? So when I say conifers, Nebraska and Iowa, we're not conifer country. And no conifer is safe to plant hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of. So we're not saying plant hundreds of these Swiss stone, they're the best thing since sliced bread. We're saying here's an alternative, okay? If you're tired of all the others, here's another one to look at. Is it Binkelhoff up in Clinton, Iowa? Yeah, they've got a nice specimen. In fact, no, this isn't from that arboretum, but I could have threw one in from the arboretum because they visited there when, was it 07, last time you guys had a big time drought? Or earlier? I think eastern Iowa, yeah, it wasn't 08, we know that. I think eastern Iowa, I know Chicago was 9 inches down, so I think you weren't far behind, at least. The lawns were brown in June, let's put it that way, so it was dry. But a lovely pine, slow growing. So what I say to folks, this is a pine for the landscape, not for the windbreak. And oftentimes we want a slow growing pine for the landscape, right? That way, too often we'll cite a pine and it'll outgrow its bounds in about 5 years, and then we have to limb them up so they look like a piece of broccoli. You know, this way you've got them all the way to the ground. It's slow growing, you know. You wave it every now and then. How you doing this year? You know, good to see you. Keep it up. So real tough, you know. But whereas if you have a Scotch pine or a white pine, you know, they grow too fast, and all of a sudden they're 40 by 40 feet, and you're going, what was I thinking? So it really works. And this is the one you're more than likely to find in the trade, Chalet. There's another one that has come out of North Dakota, Prairie Statesman, but that's iffy in the trade yet. But if anybody's going to carry it, it'll be Bailey's, and Bailey's a lot of the Iowa nurseries order from, so it'll be there eventually. Anybody growing this? You like it? Ho, ho, ho. See, now, this is why I like the Great Plants program, because everybody's hands should be going up. This should be in every garden, but it doesn't fit in every garden either. It's a big boy. This is actually Binkelhoff Arboretum. This is out there near Clinton, Iowa, if you want to see them, okay? I didn't get a chance to go to that tour because I had to fly to Chicago. Everybody else drove, and I shouldn't complain, right? But still, I missed that. Well, anyway, the bottlebrush buckeye, Missouri, Ozark native, I think it'll follow eastern Iowa up into Minnesota. It's zone 4 hardy, solid zone 4 hardy. So here's a buckeye shrub. No, that's a whole line of plants, but I'm glad you brought that up. It will sucker. So it'll spread, it'll get a little wider every year. So you want to, like a sumac or a choke cherry or a wild plum, just not as quickly as all of those. It'll be one of those, you'll be glad it's expanding. And then all you do is you kiss your love affair with turf goodbye and say, okay, I'm going to expand my bed. If this was my bed, I would have my mulch line out just past that drip line. So all the leaves dropped into my mulch and I never had to rake. That's a part of sustainable for me, is separating that turf zone from the plant zone, so we don't have to worry about raking so much. But the bottle brushes themselves bloom in the heat of the summer, which is certainly welcome. And they can be up to 12 inches. There's one called Rodgers Select that's 18 inches, just enormous. And I've seen them in zone 4 climates, so I know they're hardy. They tolerate a lot of shade. It's a woodland understory plant, meaning they like to grow in the shadow of tall trees. So if you get afternoon shade on them, perfect. That said, that one there that you just saw previous was, I think I can do this. That's in full sun. You can see the leaves way in the top there, so it's in the shadow of a tall tree, but it's full sun in the morning, shaded in the heat of the afternoon. There's one in Lincoln, and there they did the mulch bed out past the drip line, and it's such a dense grower that weeds never grow underneath them because it's too shaded. Emerging in the spring, that lower left, I think they're really cool, and they're emerging in the spring, unfolding like that, like little umbrellas. And then the fall color can be impressive as well. And buckeyes, you may or may not know, are deer-resistant plants. So I noticed some pins going there. Oh, those darn little buggers. Buckeyes, because they leaf out so early, it's like to a deer, a flag in the forest. Come eat me because I'm early. So it better come up with some defenses for that. and that's poisonous nature. The seeds are the most poisonous. You guys ever know that, the lucky Buckeye? Even though we played with them as a kid. Now they don't allow them at schools because the kids might eat them. You know, whatever. Lawyers. Anyway, great plant. Joe, this is the perennial of the year. Gateway Joe Pye plant. Now, I better see a lot of hands going up who's growing Joe Pye. Oh yeah, a few more this time. This one's a little more known. Gateway, if you don't know this selection, you know how big Joe Pye is. Gateway is supposedly a compact selection, but that's compared to other big Joe Pyes. Compact is 5 feet, okay? But man, if you haven't grown it, if you grow it, you know what I mean. Those heads, 12 inches plus, a butterfly and bee magnet. I don't think there's a better plant out there for bees and butterflies, to be honest with you, and they need our help, all we can give them, guys. Here it is, towering above the stargazer lilies there on East Campus. And those of you who have grown it, if you do want to keep it more compact, don't be afraid to pinch them like you would an aster. They pinch very well. The heads will be smaller and more numerous, but you won't have that monstrosity of a plant. But Gateway's a real good one, and you probably heard the latest, greatest new Joe Pye out there, Little Joe. It's a different species, the dubium, but that's a little winner too. I just started growing that last year, and it bloomed for me the first year. So there's a close-up of the flowers, a little bit different light on each one, so you can see the I call it kind of a mauve pink or a dirty pink, some folks call it, but whatever. Grass of the year this year. This one you may not have heard of, and excuse my font down there. It's not some funky new plant with all these, sad face and all that jazz. That was a faux pas with it. We'll blame the computer. Anyway, this is sand lovegrass, and that is on your handout there. Sand lovegrass, at least I don't think we've got that same. Okay. Anyway, sand lovegrass. Has anybody ever heard of this grass? See, this should be a new one to you. This is a Nebraska native, but it doesn't start until about the central part of our state, and then it'll get all the way up out west to Montana, Colorado, Oklahoma, Kansas, South Dakota, all over wherever it's dry country. And just like you would suspect, sand lovegrass loves to grow in the sand. Well, I've grown it for at least 15 years, and I've never grown it in sand, so it tells you something. It doesn't need sand. But any of you that have a sandy site, boy, awesome plant for that. Here's a plant that greens up early in the spring. For example, little blue stem, if you're growing that, it hasn't even started yet. This plant has already got a green base to it. So it's a warm season grass that greens up early, gives you that nice emerald tuft of green, which I look forward to in the spring. And then, because it's where it's native to, it's a very tough grass. You never have to water it. I mean, literally water it once and walk away from it. It'll take care of itself. It's not a grass for every site. It needs hot, nasty site. The windier, the hotter, the drier, the better. And I tell folks, we've all either we've got one, and if you don't bother to plant sand lovegrass. There's plenty of others to choose from. But think of the south side of a building next to a sidewalk, or think of a little island in between concrete or sidewalks. There's all those so-called inferno strips or hell strips, if you will. Perfect grass for that. And I grew it in a triangle when I used to work at State Fair, is where I first fell in love with it. And this triangle was surrounded by concrete. And I was like, what can I plant there that I don't have to water? So I just did a combination of sand lovegrass with brown-eyed Susans. You guys know the brown-eyed Susans? Seed all over the place, right? So does sand lovegrass. Duke it out. The seed had nowhere to go. The seed had nowhere to go. It was surrounded by concrete. So all those two could do was compete against each other. That's why I'm saying with the sustainable approach, you got to think like that plant, You got to think like, okay, if you plant it in a garden and it seeds all over the place, it's trying to tell you something. I'm just trying to survive here. You're just getting in my way, you gardener, you. So you got to do some things to perpetuate that plant like this. Let them reseed. Provide competition. In other words, a plant that reseeds, if it has open ground, like northern sea oats, it takes over the world, right? Or purple coneflower. But think of that purple coneflower, that northern sea oats that was in a bed that had a lot of competition. One here, one there, very manageable, right? Prairie gardening's the same way. We've got to provide competition. Otherwise, the plant's saying to us, thank you for releasing me out of that competition. Now, prairie enthusiasts like to say, It wasn't competition. They were sharing space. What's competition about like that, right? Well, you can look at it two different ways. Is it sharing space, all happily getting along, or is it, boy, if I get to take advantage of you, I'm going to do it? I think it's the latter. There it is in the summertime. I like grasses for their illuminescent quality and sunrise, sunset, backlighting, movement in the garden. That's what I love grasses. And they're space filler, textural space fillers between those big gaudy forbs. So that flower that you maybe liked in June that's starting to go dormant for you, do I deadhead it? Usually we do, right? Because it just looks ugly if you don't, and it spreads its seed around. What happens if we prairie garden and we put grasses right with those forbs? And I like to tell folks 50-50 at least, if not 75% grasses, 25% flowers. Because that grass is going to hide those dormant legs. It's going to give you that fine versus coarse texture that our human eye just loves to look at. It's going to give you movement in the garden. And it's going to be competition amongst our favorite things, henbit, dandelions, all those cool season things that come in and drive us crazy. Grasses will prevent them from germinating by having that mix in there, because that crown of that grass, it doesn't dare germinate in there, right? Really works well. Oh, and that, I forgot to show that picture in the upper right is it emerging in the spring. There's that cute little fine textured emerald green. So picture that with a forb in between those grasses coming up, like a pasque flower or whatever, a penstemon or a purple cone flower. It makes the flower jump out because of that fine texture. There it is, two different scenes, same garden. One in the early spring. You can just see the texture of the grass. It's a 50-50 mix you're looking at. And I think even though my photography stinks, it's still a pretty nice picture. There's enough flowers in there to draw your eye and to say that's beautiful versus what am I looking at. And there you see the echinacea. You can't even see it coming up. It hasn't even popped up above everything yet. And then here's the heads in the fall with that rough versus fine texture. And then backlit by the December sun, just awesome. If I could ever capture that, what my eye is seeing. And there it is, another shot in December. Okay, so we've got releases too. And these are plants developed for the program. And Harlan Hammernick, if it wasn't for him, quite frankly, most of these plants were developed by him and moved through the program through Harlan at Bluebird Nursery. Another fellow is Dr. Dale Lindgren. He's a plant breeder out at North Platte, Nebraska, which is, about an hour from the Colorado border. And Dale is the one who brought us all Husker Red penstemons. So everybody's heard of Husker Red. But not everybody's heard of the other things Dale's released. Why is that? I think it's a perfect analogy of why some plants make it and some plants don't. Husker Red's beautiful, right? But I know a lot of folks curse it too because it seeds all over the place, right? I'm well aware of that. But think of your Husker Red with competition. Did it do that same thing? Probably not. You know, it wants that competition. And I've seen that species. It's native to Iowa. I've actually collected seed at Wabaunsee State Park, far southwestern portion of Iowa, just across from Nebraska City. How many have been to Wabaunsee? Oh, beautiful place. Beautiful place. I like going there because it's where the eastern deciduous forest ends. You go across the river to Nebraska and Nebraska City, you go any further west and the eastern deciduous forest, I ain't going there. Don't want to do it, it's too dry. So isn't that cool? Trees that you saw from the Atlantic Ocean all the way across the country stop at Wabaunsee and across the river. I think that's pretty cool. Species like Chinquapin oak and white oak and red buds and things, pawpaws, things like that that you associate with southwestern Iowa. So anyway, we're looking at all those different plants in those locations, and Dale released Husker Red, which is a smooth penstemon, digitalis. Well, I saw it growing there at Wabaunsee in amongst a bunch of grasses. Competition. So we got to provide that. We also have great plants introductions, and these are plants that we introduced to horticulture. They weren't in horticulture before they were released as a great plant. Okay, that's kind of what we look for when we say, what kind of plants are you guys looking after? And notice it says in natural areas within Nebraska, in regions adjacent to, or similar to Nebraska's climate. That similar to kind of gets you away with, we'll grow across the world, you know. Because Mongolia, where a lot of our releases have come from, Harlan Hammernick has traveled over with a couple of other of his collection buddies, scouring Mongolia for cool plants. Because a lot of the collections that took place a century ago, the feudal lords and stuff that would send them over there to collect plants, they wouldn't go that far north. They didn't need to. They were just collecting for France and England and places like that that didn't need Zone 4 hardy. Now, there's a whole different group of plant collectors that are trying to get North Korea yet. You know, there's still people willing to, you know, try to get into North Korea to get plants, and then northern China and Mongolia. So we bring these back and we look at them. Herbaceous perennials are valued for a period of at least 3 to 5 years. And not all of them make it. Some of them are dogs. Some of them we see seed in beside, out the door. Others you can say, what's the difference between an invasive in the garden and an invasive period? If it escapes the garden, it's an invasive, right? If it seeds around the garden like northern sea oats, well, it's invasive in my garden. But you won't see northern sea oats pick up and seed 50 miles down the road in a woodlot, see. It's when the birds carry it or the winds carry it, that's the things you have. And like Harlan likes to say, if you know the plant's cousins and how they do, you should kind of know how they're going to perform. Meaning, if you're bringing in a honeysuckle, you better watch it pretty closely, right? If you're bringing in a euonymus, like we have, you better watch it pretty closely. Okay, they must be cold and heat tolerant. Heat tolerance is just as important for me because, again, we're promoting plants for the Great Plains. We have a gal down in Wichita, Kansas, and Wichita, to me, that's where the South begins, south of me. I mean, it's like, whenever you go to Wichita, it's baking hot. And Nebraska has our own version of that place. It's called McCook, Nebraska. It's always warmer in McCook than anywhere else, and we call it McCookin. And where's that in Iowa? You know where McCook is? Oh, really? Oh, Culbertson, sure. There's going to be a fun event out there in the fall. In fact, if I get to it, I'll have you guys here till 7 tonight. No, but if I get to it, there's a canyon called Burr Oak Canyon out by Culbertson, and it's where the Burr Oak stops. There's not another Burr Oak population within 150 miles of that tree, or that population of trees. They had a conference with all these oak nuts showing up there for 2 or 3 days talking about Burr Oaks. And of course, we collected acorns. Well, there's a nurseryman in Illinois now growing about 400 of them, and it's just up to us to go there and pick them up. Of course, I had to chime in an email saying, I propose that I grow these. Why are we sending them off to Illinois when I could grow these and help our budget? So we're going to see about that next time. But needless to say, we don't know what to call it. You don't want to call it Burr Oak Canyon Burr Oak. That isn't Culbertson Burr Oak. I don't know. But anyway, it's a cool place. It's a relic population that what they don't know is, was there lots of Burr Oak thousands and thousands of years ago, and this is all that remains? That's kind of what they think happened. All the others disappeared as the prairies moved in, as the rains ceased and the forests disappeared. Because there used to be spruce in Nebraska's sandhills. They found records of all that stuff 10,000 years ago. And as our conditions dried, as the Rockies raised, it cut off all that water, see? So we all became the Great Plains because we stopped that westerly flow of water. So the grasslands dominated. And here's this little relic population of oak trees saying, we're still here. And then others surmise that maybe Native Americans planted it in that canyon because it was a wet seep. And they knew, hey, if we show up here, we're going to have a place to camp and stay and be sheltered. And they like to roast acorn nuts, too. Interesting stuff. Here's that euonymus I was telling you about. The cute little euonymus with the funny name. And actually, it's got a worse name than Carnouse euonymus, guys. Flesh-flowered euonymus. You know, we didn't really want to call it that. Well, let's put it this way. We've released it as the species. We still are looking after that superior selection so we can call it Little Emperor or something like that, where it has that sexy name, you know. But right now, what you have is a small tree, a small ornamental tree, very slow growing. So be patient, rock solid hardy as far as cold and drought tolerance. This is a little patch. Is it deciduous?
Is it?
Yes. This is a little patch growing at Bluebird Nursery in Clarkson. And this is what it's grown for. It's like your Wahoo, except a little more substantial on the fruit. It can get some nice fall colors, and The fruit will last, probably till around Thanksgiving with that nice color, and then they'll just kind of fade to a tan and hang on the tree. And we haven't seen birds eat this fruit like they do the winged euonymus, so we have not seen it become a problem. Now that said, we have seen seedlings at the base of the plant. We just haven't seen it escape the garden. It's been in Lycan at least 12, 15 years now. Okay, here's our other little release this year. This is a white sprite gay feather. This particular gay feather, the microcephala, is also called little-headed or tiny-headed gay feather with the little buttons, if you will. It's only about a 15-inch high plant, very short little plant. The picture doesn't do it justice. It's not a very good picture. But I've been told from Rod, who discovered this plant, it'll get yellow undertones when it's in the fall, and backlit by that fall sun. It's just gorgeous. And it'll bloom right up till frost. So it'll start mid-August and go up till frost.
Like spicata, is that a nice cut flower?
Yes, but it's not going to be very big. You know, you'd have a little bud vase. Yeah, so I have a better one coming up that'll be a better cut. Okay, and these are last year's releases. This is Mist Flower. This is a relative of Joe Pye. Notice the eupatorium. But this is Eupatorium serotinum, which is many-flowered Joe Pye plant. Again, part of the reason these plants have never made the trade is names. Many-flowered Joe Pye plant. But Prairie Jule mistflower was one found with this splashed variegation. So it emerges very chartreuse. Love or hate chartreuse, you know, some people love it, some people hate it. But I really tend to like this plant when it's emerging in the spring. It's so unique. And then later on in the fall, it'll kind of lose that variegation. But later on in the fall, these are the flower buds. So it almost looks like a baby's breath, if you will, in the fall. And then they open to these little ageratum-like blossoms, or mist flower. You guys know the Eupatorium coelestinum, the little mist flower perennial. This is it's a second cousin, but it's like that plant on steroids. I mean, this thing I've seen 5 by 5 feet, guys. It gets big. So, but I've also pinched it back because it lends itself very well to being pinched back. This one on the right was pinched back and it bloomed at 3 by 3 feet. Others I've seen not touched, 5 by 5. It kind of will look, it's not the most, how do I put this? It's coarse in texture, you know, so it doesn't appeal to everyone. I tend to like it. I like plants that are great for bees and butterflies, and this one, my oh my, they love them. They love them. Just like the Joe Pye. It's anything that's a eupatorium. Put it on your list for bee and butterfly plants. And that garden you folks that visited last year, Sunken Gardens, how many folks were at that tour last year that came to visit Lycan? Oh, just a few of you, just a few. I think I've talked to all you guys that were there, well, at least some of you anyway. Well, you guys went to Sunken Gardens after that. Across the street was a new perennial garden they call the strolling garden adjacent to that rose garden. And that's where that plant is growing there. So my picture wasn't very good, but I thought it was a nice combination. So, but there you can see the size with the pennisetum there, dwarfing the pennisetum. Like I say, it looks like a baby's breath in the fall. It's gorgeous. Oh, and bee balms. I love bee balms. This is one called Prairie Gypsy. This has got a species called Bradburys. Bradburys Bbomb is in the upper right there. That's an Ozark native as well. It's another one that we should be growing more. I think Ion Exchange offers it. If not, Prairie Moon does. If not me, me and my volunteers just potted up about 8 flats the other day. I'm excited to say we have that, or will have it available. You see the little purple striations in the falls there? The Prairie Gypsy, you see, has that in the color, but Harlan planted a group of Bradburys next to the regular didemas and let them cross-pollinate and then collected the seedlings, and away you go. And he got this result, Prairie Gypsy. It blooms earlier, a month earlier than your didemas or your Cambridge scarlets, all the Prairie Knights, all those other didemas that you can think of. This guy blooms a month earlier than those, and it's only about 2 to 3 feet high. Tolerates at least a half-day shade without getting mildew. So it's a good Monarda. Or what about this Clematis? Isn't that something? That's out in North Platte, guys, where they average 18 inches of moisture. So this is one for dry, hot, okay? I want to get that through your head because I want you to get home and plant this, and it only gets 3 hours of sun, and you're disappointed. You know, they're not for every garden. If you don't have full sun, Dale never irrigates. This thing sees 18 inches of moisture a year. Would that be a pretty significant drought for Iowa City? Yeah. It's amazing when you hear places like Atlanta when they're whining about being 20 inches down and they still got 40 inches that year. You know, and you're like, I can't relate. But here it is, the Mongolian snowflakes clematis. Gorgeous plant. What you're seeing is roughly 3 by 3 feet and a whole row of them. And the individual snowflakes are gorgeous. 6-petal clematis is another common name for it. And there's the seed heads. So you get the cool flowers. And one thing I didn't throw on here were the buds. Picture these cute little white buds. You know, they're like sweet autumn clematis, except the flowers are about twice the size.
They bloom in June, though.
And they bloom in June. And they're fragrant. And they're fragrant.
Do they self-sow?
I wish they did. I have not seen that.
Mine does.
You have Mongolian snowflakes?
I don't know if that's the name, but I have a June blooming, small, fragrant one.
A bush
Well,
type?
it's a vine. It's a vine.
Because I have a vine one too that blooms in June that's called Manchurian clematis.
It does self-sow.
Dies back to the ground every year. But to a point where it's becoming a nuisance.
Not yet.
Give it time.
Friends that do it.
There you go. Perfect. Well, that means you don't like, you know, it didn't cause you not to like the plant. It's just share the plant, right? They're sharing nuisance versus, yeah, this thing's a weed. But, okay, there's the seed heads. And emerging in the spring, it is so cool. I love watching clematis emerge in the spring anyway, don't you? Especially those little shrubby ones. But this guy's no exception. Unfortunately, I've yet to get the camera out when it is emerging, so I'll get a picture of that. Other past releases, there's lots of them. Prairie Gold Quaking Aspen. This was an aspen, a quaking aspen found in Nebraska. So if you've tried to grow quaking aspen in the past, most of what the nursery trade has gotten has come from like 8,000 feet elevations in the Rockies. Even Denver and Fort Collins have tough time growing quaking aspen because they're bringing them from the upper elevations down to the city. They're having more luck with ours coming from Nebraska, which I get a kick out of. And now, of course, it's out in this nursery out in Oregon, and they with tissue culture, they can produce them like mad. So we're really excited about this. Here's a prairie. Notice the foliage there. Typical with us with quaking aspen, I imagine you, it's the same way. Black spot, big time. And we have clean foliage on these things. And I've seen them in test gardens, 30-year-old appendages. There's a big stem in Clarkson, 50 feet high with a DBH, 18-incher. And you just don't see that with quaking aspen. Here it is planted out in a brome pasture in central Nebraska. This guy that's Prairie Gold Nursery is, you actually Google the name Prairie Gold Nursery, and he kind of started his nursery based around this plant because he loves it so much. He tests conifers out in this pasture where he waters them in and just says, okay, you're on your own, to see if some of these funky trees that people write about from botanical gardens will make it without much care. And lo and behold, he's having more success in his pasture than he has planting them in people's landscapes in town. Why do you suppose that is?
You get watered too much.
Bingo.
Too much beer.
Too much, exactly. Walk away. And he's learning, those fir trees, they're tougher than people give them credit for. Things like Nico fir and, of course, concolor, Douglas. That's not a true fir, but I can't think of all their names right now. He's the conifer guy. I just trust his word. How about this tree? Dwarf Chinquapin Elk. Isn't that cool? This is an Iowa native too, but you'll find it here and there, not a whole lot of places. You probably have never bumped into it in nature. I know there's a cemetery in far western Iowa. I'll have to call Guy Sternberg. He's an oak expert in Illinois that tells me Springfield, Illinois is the central point for where bur oaks grow. Bur oaks, they're center of their natural range, so they think they've got the best bur oaks around. Well, anyway, he thinks we've got the best dwarf Chinquapin seed source around. It stops in Nebraska, just like I said. It doesn't get any further west than far southeastern corner of our state, where Missouri, Kansas, and Nebraska meet, and Iowa. That little four corner right there is where you'll find dwarf chink, okay?
How tall does it get?
The state champion's 25 feet. So it's a small oak. Scrubby oak, if you will. A shrubby, scrubby oak, like you see out in Colorado, the Gamble oak. This is our eastern version of it, okay? The foliage looks like shellacked, like it's been, and it's thick and leathery, and that's a good indicator of drought tolerance. That's a good indicator of that I'm a tough bird. And these things grow on these limestone outcroppings in southeast Nebraska, where you're standing up there even in the fall and it's sweat coming down, it's hot as the blazes. It's a rhizomatous oak. It had to learn to grow in the prairie, meaning fire, bring it on, we'll just sucker from the roots, just like a wild plum or a chokecherry did. Interesting stuff. So here's one, I've seen a plant get eaten to the ground by bunnies 3 years in a row, and every year it'd come back, and the owner finally decided to cage it, and away it went, you know. So here's one that in my mind is deer and bunny proof, because just go ahead, take it back every year, it'll keep coming back. I've seen this thing like a ground cover up in nature, where there's a patch 20 by 20 feet, and it's only 1.5 feet tall with acorns on it. I've read where they used to turn the swine loose in these big stands. It would grow these huge swaths of it and copious amounts of acorns. Off 2 bushes I've got there, they've grown some since then, 600 acorns off 2 bushes. Now you may say, I don't want that mess, Bob. Good luck that acorn hitting the ground, because the critters like it so much. I have to be on top of it in order just to get an acorn. But look at the catkins in the spring. So because it's an oak at eye level, you can actually go, you know, the flowers are kind of cool. Versus, you know, with your binoculars, oak flowers are neat, except when they get in my gutters. But there's the cool acorns. Isn't that a cool tree? And then the fall color, typically bronzy yellow, nothing to get overly abundantly excited about. But you will get excited seeing all those acorns. I had a fella down in St. Joe contact me because he found out we had them and was wondering if he could buy some seed from me. So I sold him a pound of seed, and he said, do you mind if I put your name out on a listserv for white-tailed deer hunters? Because turkey hunters, white-tailed deer, habitat lovers really like this plant because of its copious acorn production. And it'll produce acorns, and I've seen it after 3 years. 3 years, guys. Most oaks, it takes 10 to 15, okay? So here, now I've got demand. I bet I could sell 100 pounds of acorns, and the most I've ever collected was 30, so I don't know how I'm going to keep everybody happy. I just keep saying yes, though, you know. Oh, I'll put your name down and contact you next fall. Because this last fall, I collected this many acorns I could fit in my hand, you know, so not every year is good, right? Carragena, the pea shrubs. This is one Harlan Hammernick brought back from Mongolia. And this was growing, as he told me, I think it was above 10,000 feet. Nothing else was growing up there, he said, except this plant. Well, love or hate Carragenas, I'm not a big fan of them, but this guy's really grown on me. It has a larger flower than typical Carragenas if you ever grown the pea shrubs. The pea shrubs are often regarded as this utility shrub. You stick out in the North 40 and forget about it. You know, it's not one for home. It's not one for the home landscape necessarily. But here's one from a hot, dry place that could be planted as a barrier, if you will. It'll get 8 to 12 feet tall, has little thorns on it, and there's why Harlan selected it, was for the seed pods just as much as the flower. Mongolian silver spires, grows very spire-like. And then a blue stem that we call silver sunrise, and this is, you guys know big blue stem? This is its cousin, sand blue stem. Sand blue stem shows up in nature about mid-Nebraska and then goes further west, Montana and stuff. Typically noted more gray-green foliage than the typical emerald green of a big blue, as you can see. Starts getting fall color. Gosh, I've seen it on stressed plants in July and August. The plants you see there in the upper right, there's inch cracks around them, so very, very drought tolerant. I mean, that was during a very dry year. Close up of the flowering culms. They have yellow bands in the flowering culms, which makes them even brighter in that September light. Really gorgeous. Again, this is one for that hottest, windiest, driest, nastiest spot you've got, not for that part shade, over-irrigated, over-stimulated spot you got. It won't like you. It's places like this, even though the picture's not good, I mean, the light wasn't good. You're there that day. What are you going to do? You're going to snap the shot. But I wanted to shoot it to show this is the type of spot I'm talking about, a hell strip. I mean, here it is next to a parking lot, and this person didn't have an opportunity to ever water it. What can I plant there because I'm not going to be there to water it? Bingo. And there it is in the far other end of the state in Scottsbluff, Nebraska. Again, not a very good picture, but you get the point. It's adaptable. Here's that one for cuts that I was telling you about. They're really looking at this. I know at the university they have a fellow that has his own cut flower business, so certainly this is one that they've been working with, this Eureka. It was named after where the seed was collected, not Eureka. I found it. It's more like Eureka, Kansas. So that was actually found in Kansas. And it's the granddaddy of the prairie. I mean, the thick spike gay feather is that 5-footer. But look at what it does when it's with grasses. See what I'm talking about? What do you like? What does your eye like better? Do you like that shot or that one? I know they're both nice. You probably like this one, right? But see what the grasses do to the texture? That fine versus coarse? And another thing I would contend they do, the grass stems aren't holding up those stems necessarily. What they're doing is everybody's getting a piece of the pie. The sunlight, the available rainfall. When the rainfall comes, everybody gets a little bit, right? We're forced to share. If that liatris is all of a sudden planted 2 foot on center next to all its buddies, and there's no grasses involved, they all flop all over the place. And you go, I hate that plant. I thought you said that was such a nice plant, Bob. You know, no. We gotta think like Mother Nature. Plant grasses. You'll be so happy you did. Fallopian, mile-a-minute vine. It's another name for it. Silver lace vine. Yeah, silver lace. This is a fallopian that was found with chartreuse leaves. Isn't that gorgeous? Harlan likes to call this a half a mile-a-minute vine. Because it lacks chlorophyll, it doesn't run as fast, see? But there it is on a fence that had that black cloth on it, so that chartreuse against that black, wow. Depends how loud you like it. What about goldenrods? I'm a big fan of goldenrods. We have around a dozen species native to Nebraska, and I imagine Iowa's the same boat. A lot of folks still think to this day that it causes hay fever. We all know it doesn't, right? It's botanically impossible. The pollen is too heavy to be carried by the wind. So anybody that naysays you, you can answer them as a master gardener and say, it's botanically impossible. And they go, whoa, 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 wait a minute, whoa, 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 whoa. In other words, you sound like you know what you're talking about that way. Seriously. And this is one for you bee and butterfly lovers. Wow. Fantastic plant. Wichita Mountains. Anybody know where the Wichita Mountains are? It's not Wichita, Kansas. Close. Wichita Mountains in western Oklahoma. Supposedly, what I've been told, the oldest mountain range in the U.S. It's just been eroded down so much that nobody thinks of going to visit the Wichita Mountains in Oklahoma, right? We go to the Rockies, which are America's youngest mountains, right? They just haven't been eroded down like them all. But Wichita Mountains has this goldenrod that Harlan discovered there visiting a nursery friend of his. And the nursery guy just happened to be a tree lover. And Harlan sees it bloom and is back there. He's saying, what is that back there? Oh, it's just some goldenrod I dug out of the hills. Well, show me where you got this. So we still haven't identified what species it is. But bottom line, here's a true golden rod, not a golden spray, right? Most of them are sprays. Here's a rod. Darn thing looks like a gay feather, except it's yellow. And look at the buds before it blooms. I think the buds are cool. And then there's a close-up of the flowers. Oh, cut. I think for cuts, it's got potential, but there's a professor there that's real picky. It's got to be, it's got to be perfect. Meaning it's not a full wand before the top starts to fade, and florists don't like that. Wah. That doesn't mean you and I can't cut it for our own garden use, right? We're not as picky as florists. But there's the seed heads, aren't they cool? Even against the snow. And I will cut those and put those in outdoor arrangements on my front porch with grasses and stuff, and they'll last all winter long like that, all winter long.
But does that make it spread?
I'm glad you brought up spreading. It is a goldenrod, and it will seed. It will seed. Now, it's not a thug like Canada, though. Canada goldenrod, seeds all over, but Canada goldenrod also runs. This one, thankfully, is a buncher, meaning it's not going to rhizominously spread. But you do want to provide competition or plant it in between a rock and a hard place. And that rock and a hard place could be group of one grass, goldenrod, group of another grass, surround it by something so it has nowhere to seed. See what I'm saying with that competition? But I've had people complain about it, but I've had others say, I like how it reseeds. It just depends on how you garden. But I'm glad you brought that up, because yeah, here I am ranting and raving about it, and it's a darn cedar. But to me, that's a good thing, especially after a winter like this when the voles ravaged me. How many got hit by voles this year? Just hammered me. And of course the bunnies and everything else that went into this winter. I can look at this and go, well, they didn't touch the goldenrod. One tough plant, man. At least you're going to be there. My old dependable goldenrod didn't give up on me. Pincushion flowers, right? Scabioses. Everybody and their puppy dogs planted butterfly blue, right, and pink mist, and watched them die one by one. Well, scabioses, they're a little persnickety. They're a little short-lived. They need that dry, well-drained soils. But I've found Mongolian mist, I've had them in the garden at least 5 years before they start to decline, and they do decline. You'll get a seedling here or there, though, but this is one Harlan brought back from Mongolia. I'll tell you what I'll try and do. I'll fly through these introductions, and then we'll take our break. And then the problem with the great plants is as the program gets older, there's new plants added on every year. There's so many cool plants, that I can't get through them all, and it's like, so I don't leave them out either, because just in case I might get to them. Okay, here's another one, obviously from Mongolia, an allium. I'm a big fan of ornamental onions because deer don't like them, bunnies don't like them, drought doesn't like them, wet doesn't like them. Good luck killing an allium. Except the thugs, right? Garlic chives, right? But there I just tell people, eat the blossoms, and then you don't have to worry about seed. Take one of those umbels and cut it right over your salad, and then, of course, you can never keep up the darn things, right? But here's one with pink flowers, whitest pink, that was brought from Mongolia, from Harlan, Mongolian gem, just basically 3-inch pom-poms in the fall. Because again, most of our alliums, heck, the chives are blooming or about to bloom now, right? This one blooms in September. Skullcaps, I love skullcaps, or the Scutellarias. This is one brought from Mongolia by Harlan. Look at that. That's one of my favorites that he brought from there. Just a gorgeous, I'm a big fan of course, being a guy, I'm a sucker for blues and purples. And salvias and veronicas, love them. And here's just a good alternative to veronicas and salvias for you, the Scutellarias.
Is that really a scientific study that men like certain colors?
I was just generalizing. Yeah, definitely a generalization there. I'm a sucker for pinks too, I mean, come on. But I had to throw in, most guys, we like to sound like we're macho gardeners. I only do blues and yellows and reds, hot colors. I'm a sucker for the Monet stuff, That's me. But anyway, Taylor junipers. Anybody ever hear of those? Plant these? Oh gosh, you guys got to love this plant. Okay, you want the Italian cypress look? This is an eastern red cedar that was found near Taylor, Nebraska. That, again, the hotter, the drier, the sunnier, the better. This thing has been tested from North Dakota south to Oklahoma and all points in between. Minnesota loves it. I think you'll fall in love with it too. It's not for every site. It's not for a part shade site, meaning you're more like to do an arborvitae there. And they will get opened up a little bit with the sun. There's the little town of Taylor, Nebraska, one of the oldest ones there by their church. You're looking at a 35-foot tree, maybe 4-foot base. This is one of Dale Lingren's releases. I'm just going to fly through these now. Comanche campfire, the Missouri primrose we've heard of, right? This one was found in Oklahoma that has more silvery foliage. Logan Calhoun, the white one, is the white version of pink poppy mallow or purple poppy mallow. Logan Calhoun was a Native American plant explorer that brought the plant to Harlan. Harlan named it in honor of him. And that was another Oklahoma discovery. I love the foliage of this plant. It's more cut than your typical Calaroes or purple poppy mallows. And the flowers are just satiny white. Tharps spiderwort or dwarf spiderwort. This is a Kansas find as well, Kansas native. Not in horticulture before we released it. Little spiderwort, I've seen them bloom 2 inches high with a 2-inch flower. Cool little thing. And then it disappears, completely ephemeral, goes dormant, and then sends up a new rosette in the fall to remind you, don't dig me up, I'm still here.
Do they sucker?
They will seed around, but it's such a dinky little plant. You welcome that seeding because it'll create plant combinations you didn't think of. And you can get variations in color. Look at that one on the right, all those flowers packed in there. Guys, that's only 4 inches high. And the toughest prairies of Kansas. So this thing's tough as nails. It's just smarter than us. It doesn't go through summer like we want to. It just says, I'll be back in the fall. Thank you very much. Oh, and my absolute fave. You guys have all heard of John C. Fremont. There's a Fremont County, Iowa. I saw it on the map. There's a Fremont, Iowa. In fact, I drove through it today. It was don't blink, and it was there, but it was a Fremont, Iowa. There's a Fremont, Nebraska, a Fremont County, Nebraska. There's a Fremont, Kansas, and a Fremont County. Why do you suppose that is? He traveled all the way to the west, right? Around the 1840s, he was the first white man to catalog this plant. So they named it in honor of him. I think right there's a reason to have it in your garden. Now, I don't want to disappoint you because I had to tell these guys that right now, Bluebird's still building their supply back up, and so am I. So it's real hard to find right now. But don't quit looking. The settlers called it leather flower or leather leaf, very thick texture to them. And when they're emerging in the spring, they're so cool with little cup-like leaves, and it'll open and then a new one comes out of there. See how they're covered with fuzz? Real cool plant. Just exquisite blooms. The bloom will start off like that, and then as the sunlight intensity, they'll change. They'll get darker with the ultraviolet rays. Okay, dry gardens, rock gardens. Anybody into rock gardening? Except when we think rock gardens, we think of alpine plants, don't we? Sometimes. They don't do very well. I like growing what's called saxatile. These are plants that grow among rocks at lower elevations, meaning our prairie dryland species. And I'm going to go through these very, very quickly because I know these guys want to yell at me right now. Here's prairie snow shell-leaf penstemon, another Dale Lindgren, the Husker Red guy I was telling you about. This is one of his releases that never took off because it's a dryland species. You want it to spread. You like shell-leaf penstemon?
Well, I was given one once that spread
Too much?
too much.
Wow. God, that's a good problem to have, I think. I love them so much. I had the same problem, but they kind of choked themselves out. I remember one year I literally had 100 of them, and I was just like, oh, look at that scene. I had a lady comment and say that those things looked fake to her. She had to come up and touch them. They looked so perfect. Now, my photography doesn't help, but still. Yeah, the typical shell-leaf penstemon's pink, so this is a white variation that was found. This is another one of Dale Lindgren's releases. This is a cobia penstemon crossed with a southern species, so he got different colors in there. And they look like hot air balloons before they bloom. To me, that's one of our best releases. It's eye candy, guys. And then Warax penstemon, this is another shell leaf selection. And all the shell leaf penstemons, all penstemons in general, want it dry, they want it hot, and they want it well drained. Back off the water. In fact, never water them. Just say, okay, I'm going to resist. It's 105 today. We didn't get any rain last week. It's dry again this week. The forecast is dry again the following week. You may want to water then. Otherwise, don't worry about it. And then the little Dianthus wink was released through us. This was one developed out in North Platte. Love Dianthus, this little Dianthus. And I've grown a number of them and killed a number of them. This is a good, dependable Dianthus for us. Callilophus, this is a relative of your primroses, or your Missouri primrose. This is one for the rock garden that is short-lived. I've had plenty of people tell me it didn't overwinter for me. So I'm just warning you, grow it like you would a marigold. But here's a marigold you don't have to water. So what's the difference, right? We still plant a geranium, we still plant a marigold. Here's a more sustainable plant. And notice the mulch. It can take a rock for mulch. And I've seen it growing in Kansas in amongst rocks and where it wants to grow. Here's another little Dianthus that was developed out of North Platte. Again, these are rock garden plants I'm showing you here. And then this little Clematis, South Dakota native. Isn't that cute? And then a little sedum that Harlan brought back from Mongolia. Love this plant. Right now, I just took a picture of it the other day. I didn't put it in here, but it's this 4-inch ball. It's only 12 inches in bloom. It's a little guy. It's different than your other sedums that it's not going to spread. It's going to die back to that crown. And you're going to think it's dead, and then here comes the foliage the next year. It's different from all that. That was one of the reasons Harlan said he was looking for it. I got a 10-minute story I could tell you about this plant, but we don't have time. But there's the Mongolian stars in the fall. Or this little skullcap. This is a prairie skullcap that comes from Kansas. The Smoky Hills region of Kansas, Salina, Kansas area. You know where that's at? Look at that thing. Each flower dotted with an equal sign. No, actually, they say those are nectar guides. The bees are too dumb to know. The nectar's in here. Here, let me guide you to it. I don't know. Do you really think bees are that dumb? I don't think so. Big fan of Willa Cather. We named this in honor of Willa Cather's novel because it was found near Red Cloud, Nebraska. So, of course, we had to do that. And I had a lady down in Texas that called me and who was a big fan of Laura Bush, of course, being from Texas when she was our first lady, and wanted to get this flower to her because one of her favorite novelists was Willa Cather. Well, needless to say, the White House, with all their red tape and hoopla, she called me and said, I don't think we're going to get this done. I don't think it's going to happen. When she moves back to Crawford, Texas, maybe it can happen. But I haven't heard anything. So I'm just kind of waiting for that phone call someday. Can you get me some plants? There's the foliage. Does that look like an aster? Weird looking thing. Clematis, another one. Look at that one. We're into shrub clematis here in our program. Yeah. There's a climber called Tangotica McKenzie. Yeah, that's a... This is a different animal. This is a 3-by-3 foot bush. Okay. That's it. I promise. They were being patient with me. I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, Bob.
You're welcome.
Oh, that was really wonderful.
Let me grab this.
And isn't it great to have a speaker who has so much information? It's hard to get it all in. It's just wonderful. So I really do appreciate that. Well, it's time to collect questions. I hope you've been thinking about good questions to ask Bob, because I bet you that he'll have lots of good answers. So put your questions up in the air if you have some, and we'll pick those up, and then we'll have a little refreshment.
So it's been a great 3 times for our event, and certainly we've had saved the best here for last. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If you have more questions, let me know. We're going to begin with, what plants would you recommend for heavy clay?
Oh, boy.
That's Iowa.
There's a loaded question, isn't it? What plants? Now, do you mean what plants from this program or just in general? Who asked this? That was your question? Are you battling heavy clay?
Oh, yeah.
What you need to do, and folks, tell me if I'm wrong, you need to grow your soil again rather than grow plants. Okay. In the meantime, you need what's called clay busters. Now, if you're after native plants, a good reference is Prairie Nursery. Just look them up online. Neil Diebold is the owner of Prairie Nursery. They're in Wisconsin. And Neil has put together a list that he likes to call clay busters. And these are plants that tolerate clay, thrive in clay just fine. For me, thinking like nature, you wouldn't necessarily go with these dryland species that I was showing. It's more mesic species, or species that were native to low areas. And folks, if you think about it, a lot of the native plants that have made it into the garden center, there's a reason they have, and they're hard to kill with the watering wand. You get these xeric plants in a garden center, and you get a new employee in, or even an old employee, they're just as likely to kill them. Depending how long you water them, right? You can get them to dampen off in their containers. So that's one reason drought-tolerant plants never get into your hands, is because they may have ordered 5 flats 4 of the flats died, and all they could sell was with 3 of them because they all died while they were there in the garden center. Then you take them home, plant them in heavy clay, and they die for you, and you go back and you say to the garden center, those plants you sold me died. When we need to say, you mean I killed them, right? And now every plant for me gets a 3 strikes, you're out. Meaning if I plant it twice and it died without me doing anything differently, meaning was this good for clay? I don't know, I tried it 3 different ways. I raised it up a foot, I gave it a bunch of organic matter, I provided different mulches, and it still died. I'm trying to move on to a different plant. But, I mean, we could be here, you got your typical stuff that everybody plants. Your daylilies is good for clay, you know, your black-eyed Susans, your purple coneflowers. Those are lowland species. Echinacea purpurea is not native to Iowa. It's native to Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia. I don't know if it quite makes it up to us. Our native species don't like what we do to Rudbeckia goldstrom. Rudbeckia goldstrom is a lowland species, meaning we can kill it, we can't kill it with kindness. You can't overwater that plant. Yet it's drought tolerant. That's a mesic species, meaning it's wet in the winter, dry in the summer. Wet in the spring, dry in the summer. So look at Neil's list. Can't go wrong.
All right. I have clay too. How many of you have clay soil in your yards? Yeah.
Everybody does, you know, but
Problem.
right? How many folks are lasagna gardening in that clay? Yeah. And I know you're the compost queen, aren't you? I just know it. Lasagna gardening, sell them on it. Is it an easy thing to do? It's an easy thing to do, and it's not a new concept. Google it. I mean, there's tons of information on this. And there's a lady up in Rapid City that swears by it. In Rapid City, the Journey Museum, $7 million museum, $70,000 landscape, all the plants were dying. Who did they go to? The master gardeners. Why are all our plants dying? We spent 70 grand on this thing. So she's like, first thing she says is, your soil's dead. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Try telling that to administrator. Dead soil? That doesn't mean anything to administrator. So what does she do? She starts lasagna gardening. And every garden, every bed, they layering up 2 feet high with a variety of organic materials, watering it after each layer, letting it break down, and then she's planting right into that mulch after a year. And she's even putting signs in there saying, please excuse our construction, we're growing soil. Brilliant. So for those people going by, why do they have all these empty beds, honey? This is ugly. Oh, the sign says right there. So that gets the administrators to say, see? Joe Blow Public can come by and go, well, I see what they're doing. They're trying to save money by growing soil.
Your sound isn't all
Oh. Well, it says Oh, okay. How's that? Good enough? All right.
All right. Can you recommend a grass for an area that gets limited sun?
Oh, yeah. First of all, look to your sedges. Who asked the question? Don't be shy. Oh, there you are. How much shade? Full shade, part shade? Part shade, the easiest one is northern sea oats, but anybody who else is, you already got that. So, no. But everybody who's got northern sea oats knows what kind of a thug that thing can be. But confined in shade, i.e. part shade with competition, I'll see a few showing up here and there, but it's still, you got to keep your eye on that grass because it will try to do that to you. But northern sea oats is still worth growing in the shade, I think. And then another one I really love that we didn't get to is Korean reed grass. That's Carl Forster's cousin from Korea. And that turkey, that's a pretty versatile grass. Mine at home's lucky if it sees 3 hours. Yes. Calamagrostis brachytricha, however you want to pronounce it, but Korean reed grass. And then the sedges. Think sedges, guys. Sedges are grass-like plants, the carex. And a lot of gardening nerds will call them carex because sedge scares people, because everybody thinks yellow nut sedge, which is not a true sedge. Yellow nut sedge is a like a yuncus or a scirpus or something like that, which is a wetland plant, but not a carex, okay? So a lot of the foo-foo gardeners will say carex, because carex does not say nut sedge. But I'm a carex nut. I have I just counted the other day on my fingers and toes. I have 9 or 10, maybe 12 varieties, and mostly natives. Nebraska has 60 species native, and I don't think Iowa's probably got more than that. New species are still found in our neck of the woods, guys. Nebraska's had 2 species in the last 10 years found for the first time ever. We all think it's the tropics, but those were the lowly little carex. Lots of variety out there. What you'll find in the garden centers are the stuff from Japan. They're these variegated things that are fine. But I like the natives. And what I look for, like with Prairie Moon Nursery, we'll get to that sources question. Man, Ion Exchange, Prairie Moon Nursery, huge selection.
They can grow with hostas, which some people don't realize.
Exactly. Look great with hostas, because hostas are still inching up. My sedges are already blooming. I've got sedges at home 6 inches high in bloom. And they're cute. And tough. I could go up to them and they'd say, "It's okay, Bob, we can take it." So they take, you can step on them, my kind of plant. No abuse intended, but
All right.
it happens.
All right, here's a couple questions on Joe Pye weed, and we'll start with this one. What's the habitat for the Joe Pye gateway? Is that the new one? Is it for wet areas?
Good question. Great question. Rain gardens, is that a big buzzword in Iowa too? It's a big buzzword for us too. Perfect for a rain garden. In fact, in Lincoln, they've got a grant program going on for homeowners to apply for, and Joe Pye is one of their signature plants to put in. I'm a little leery when I see them putting it a foot next to some other plant, because it does get big. So site it. It gets huge. Site it as a backdrop if you can. It's not for every site. The best ones I've seen, like maybe somebody has a big privacy fence and they'll put it as a backdrop next to that privacy fence with some shorter stuff in front of it. Or miscanthus. We all like miscanthus. It's a great complement with miscanthus as that backdrop. But yeah, just be cautious. If you ever didn't like it, it'd be because it got too big for you. And just give it that space that it wants. And yes, it does take wet very, very well. And if you've got it in full sun and it's a dry area, it will let you know when your garden's going, I could use a little drink here. It's one of the first things to wilt. But that being said, I've never seen one die. Even it'll wilt on a 100-degree day, and then the next morning it'll be perked up. How many know that trick? When is the right time to water? Better yet, when to tell that client when the right time is to water. You're the gardeners. You know when that is. It's just observe, right? But people don't observe that are I call them yardners. They're out there yardening, but they're not gardening. So they're not observing. So it's hard to explain to them, when do you water, right? I mean, well, how often do you water? I don't know. It's just kind of one of those things I do when it's there. Well, when? They want a date. So I tell them, if it's wilting in the morning, that tells you it's dry. If it's wilting in the heat of the afternoon, heck, we could have got 4 inches the day before, and it's wilting on a 100-degree day, right? We've seen that, right? So wilting in the morning is a good indicator to water.
Okay. The second question was to ask about the water requirements, so I think we have that answer, whoever wrote that question. Okay.
Yeah.
How about edible recommendations?
Edibles. Oh boy, there's a hot button for me. Do you mean grazing edible or not vegetable? You mean grazing?
I mean, anything.
Anything at all. Well, we didn't get to them, unfortunately. But I noticed on my drive here down by Ottumwa in the hills, the service berries in bloom. And, of course, I'm like going, I need to get that seed. Rockport, Missouri is probably my closest where I can find it native for me. But the service berries, if any plant you guys remember for edible gardening, do get into service berries if you haven't. June berries is another name for them. Amelanchier. Up in Canada, they still call them Saskatoons. Down in Georgia, they call them sarvisberry. Nebraska, we call them service berries. That's why we have scientific names. That's why we have scientific names. Amelanchier. You're not saying it to be foo-foo. As Harlan likes to say, heck, we memorized ibuprofen. Why can't we memorize, right? Why can't we memorize Amelanchier? So, all those funky drug names, we have no problem memorizing those. But scientific names, we poo-poo. I thought that was funny, but I got a kick out of Harlan. But anyway, Amelanchier, man, my neighbor, I've turned my neighbor onto those. And I've got 4 boys. My neighbor has 2 boys and a girl. So his 2 boys, the girl, they don't, do things together. They're boys and girls, right? So anyway, my 4 boys, his 2 neighbor kids. We had 8 kids, and us 2 packed all in a Suburban. We go around, because I know where these Juneberries are growing. And because I've always had people say, how do you beat the birds? And I say, well, I got plan A. And if the birds made it to plan A, I go to plan B, C, D, and I got all these spots, public ground, that I can go collect. And it's fun when you have 8 kids around a tree, because who in the room can say is the last time you got your kids or your grandkids out to collect choke cherries or wild plums, right? Pretty rare. Pretty darn rare. Well, the kids don't want to do it, So, but they'll come out and collect Juneberries with me rather than playing their PlayStations, because they know the pie is to rival. The best pie in the world is Juneberry rhubarb pie. And my neighbor beats me. He was more of a glutton than me. He would go back out and say, got more Juneberries last night. I'm like, where did you find these? So he was scoping them out after. We got 8 gallons between us.
Oh
They
my.
freeze. They freeze just as good as a blueberry. You can use them just like you would a blueberry. Pie, jam, jelly, sauce, wine.
How do you get them before the birds?
Well, that's the only way I do. I have one at home, and I don't even bother, because I don't beat the birds. Convince your city to plant more of them around is what you need to do, is get the city planters to put them in. Then all of a sudden the city's starting to plant them because they're figuring out they're tough. Or you spot a neighbor's when you're driving by, and you tap on her door, and then try to tell her, they're not very good, but do you mind if I eat those over there? because if she finds out they're awesome, she's going to say, oh no, we're collecting our own this year, thank you very much. But
There's some bird that only comes just when those things bloom, or when they're bright.
robins love them.
No, they're not robins.
Thrashers?
They're gray, and they have the prettiest.
Catbirds.
Melodious voice. Catbirds. Is that catbird? Wow.
Don't they have a
No,
cool
don't
voice?
say that. They
Well, I can't do a catbird call.
really have a really pretty cry, and they just descend on it, and one day they're all gone. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. That's why literally again, I have my areas. That's the only way I can get away with it. But you're right, squirrels love them too. But you guys heard of pemmican? What Native Americans with dried buffalo meat, they would pound that with dried fruits. The fruit of choice was serviceberry. And I've dried them before. You can dry them, store them, break them out, and use them in muffins. Wild Seasons, I think you can find it on Timber Press. Kay Young's the author. Great book. If you're a grazer, you need that. Because how many of us hate stinging nettles?
Oh,
You can eat them. Exactly. I've got 2 big trays on my kitchen table right now, drying as we speak. And they're the only green you can dry and reconstitute, and it maintains that bright green color as you throw it in soups. High in vitamins. In fact, they used to, you've heard of maybe nettle tea, nettle compost tea, feeding horses nettles to make their coat sleek, all those things. Okay, we better move on. I could be on edibles till. You asked a loaded question there, buddy. Another one I really love is currants, gooseberries. Clove currant. Look for clove currant called crandall.
but do you like cooking them?
Well, the reason I like this, see, yeah, the little thing on the end of them, the little, okay, that's why I like clove, because clove is thornless. Crandall, C-R-A-N-D-A-L-L, was a selection out of Kansas, and the fruits are ½ inch. And some of those gooseberries, they're just little guys, so it is a hassle, and they're full of thorns. But clove has got a delicious flower scent, as well as you can have your cake and eat it too.
all right. Our native insects, butterflies and bees, are dependent upon native plants. Will the plains plant provide what they need?
The plains plants. Well, meaning the difference between Nebraska's plains plants and Iowa's plains plants, I assume, is what you mean, right? I look at native in a regional sense. There's some folks that are what I call native purists, meaning I'm in Nebraska and say, well, I don't want to grow that. It's not native to Nebraska, when it might be 2 counties into Kansas or 2 counties into Iowa. And I'm like, okay, if I'm in Omaha and I'm driving to Scottsbluff, Nebraska, that's a jaunt. It's 8 hours, guys, 8 hours. Now I can make it across Iowa in what, 6? 4? Whew, you're cooking.
Oh, she's driving.
She's cooking. I need to drive with you next time, man. Well, I did a roundabout. 5. Okay. But anyway, from Omaha to Scottsbluff, that's 8 hours. If I head east, shoot, I'm darn near in Chicago. I head north, I'm in Minneapolis. South, I'm St. Louis. So, you know, you draw a big ring around Omaha and say, okay, if you use that native purist you, then you better be planting stuff like rabbit brush that's native to western Nebraska. Beautiful plant that none of us can grow. We wish we could grow it, but yet you go to Scottsbluff and nobody grows rabbit brush. They all grow purple coneflower and miscanthus, and it's just like, you know, celebrate where you live, right? But anyway, back to your question. Okay, you probably read Doug Tallamy's book, Bringing Nature Home. Who asked the question anyway? Did you read his book yet?
I read part of it.
Yeah, and basically Doug Tallamy's a researcher at University of Delaware. Great book, by the way. You need to get it. I think it's called Bringing Nature Home, right? And in there he talks about the value of prairie plants. Okay, we can all be purists and say, okay, we want prairie plants because. Remember I talked about low input. If the plant doesn't take much water, I never have to fertilize it, never have to provide pesticides, and if I do, the reason I look at plants with pesticides is you're expendable. That's why I like prairie gardening, because if a critter took out a plant, c'est la vie. There's many more where that came from. Like the voles. You know, at first I was just like, ugh. And then I got to say, you know, they're trying to tell you something. You know, you provided for me, the lowly old vole, even though I hated to, I still provided for the vole. And that vole's alive because of me. Now, does my garden suffer? Sure. Okay? But it also helps me to look at it and go, okay, I didn't pay $10.95 for that plant. It seeded down, gave itself for me free. Why can't I be willing to do the same? Right? That's what prairie gardening is about. Plants are expendable. So, does it help your native insects? By all means. If it's coming from Nebraska, yeah, that's a little bit of a stretch from, say, Omaha to Iowa City, but it's much more of a stretch from, you know, Switzerland or Mongolia, because our native insects, a lot of them are migratory, and you can't tell me that they weren't timed by the bloom of that plant, right? And when they reared their young and all this and that. We could bring European plants in and Asian plants and say, well, look, the butterflies are just going ape over them. And this was Tallamy's point. Yeah, they're enjoying the nectar, but they have nowhere to lay their young because they have not developed that association with that plant like they have with our prairie. Like butterfly, the milkweed plants are the prime example with the monarch, right? And you can think about the swallowtails. Well, with the swallowtails laid on dill, that's a European plant, isn't it? But it's all the little guys that we don't recognize that flutter around, the little blue azures and the fritillaries and the things that won't come into town because they don't like us. You know, they want the open prairie. Those are the things that struggle. And I think if we prairie garden in towns and in local communities, we can create those bridges between the Yardners. So they're saying, okay, there's food every, let's hope every block. You know, right now it's about every 10 blocks. But we can just get these people to say, you know, there's a different way of gardening rather than just breaking out your mower once a week. And you're going to enjoy it. And I think a lot of it has to do with the edible landscaping. Because once we do more edible landscaping, you get out front with your neighbors. Rather than just sticking everything in the backyard, we're out front gardening. And all of a sudden, that neighbor that we never even met, and we've lived next to him 5 years, right? We're all guilty of that. What got neighbors together in the past was gardens. Because you had to unload your zucchini on somebody. Seriously, wouldn't you say? That's what got all of us to know each other. And today it's sharing that thug that's seeding around a little bit. But in the past it was food, and thankfully we're getting back to food, right? What horticulture was intended to do was feed the world.
Okay, sources for these plants and what to look for in plant quality, size, etc., and price.
I'm glad we got to your question. She was asking me about sources because, yeah, you can talk about plants till you're blue in the face, but if you can't find them, And it is frustrating because, again, a lot of the local garden centers aren't carrying natives. They aren't carrying these great plants. And quite honestly, I think I explained a little bit before why I feel that is the case. You know, I don't blame them. We as consumers have to ask for them, first of all. And quite frankly, most of these garden centers, like you said, they're in tune with coral bells. They're in tune with the new echinacea because that's what they're seeing in the glossy magazines. They're getting the same stuff you are. Oh man, look at this one. We better order that. Everybody's going to want it. So the marketing is directly related to the consumer because the consumer will go into Earl May and say, I saw this new coral bells, just gorgeous. What was the name? Oh, dragon tails or whatever. And then all of a sudden they know they better be carrying dragon tails. So, but more and more prairie plants are getting written about. But then what happens is the garden centers, there's so many to choose from. Like you said, it's overwhelming. How do you know what to carry? And I'm trying to figure that out myself too to this day. There's certain prairie plants that are, you know, no-brainers, a given, you know, that will perform well. The gay feathers of the world, the echinaceas, things like that. But there's a whole other group that just is completely unheard of. And some of these are the great plants, but there's a plethora I'm not even beginning to show you. Just boggle your mind. But back to where to find them, the great plants, not necessarily the prairie plants, but the great plants releases is Bluebird Nursery. And that's in Clarkson, Nebraska. But they're a wholesaler, so that ain't going to help you unless you go there. And that ain't going to help you either because that's a jaunt. I mean, who's going to want to go to Bluebird just to get plants? Now, if you go there... Oh. Wrong question. Wrong question. Okay, let me rephrase that. Who's going to go to Bluebird without getting a request list from everybody else, right? You know, have this group email and say, I'm going up. If everybody puts a request, I'll buy them by the flats, you know. Now, we do sell plants through the statewide arboretum. I ship plants mail order. So say you wanted to just try 2 or 3 of something. I can ship them to you. So at the end, I don't know if we'll have time, but we'll put my email up there and stuff at the very end. Maybe we should just do that now, huh?
All right.
How do we get that back up?
Someone from
We need
that
Maeve
room
up here.
over there will
She'll
help.
get it under control. So maybe just put that up there. So yeah, we do ship by all means. In fact, I just shipped plants last week. One group went to Georgia and another one went to Texas. So we ship all over, except I won't go overseas. It's too much of a hassle. I had these Australian people that just wanted them. And I was like, why do you want, when you've got so many cool plants in Australia?
I think you're okay.
What are they laughing about?
Let's get close.
Did they think I was going to get clubbed?
Well, we were watching.
All right. Okay, so anyway, prairie plants. My golly, where I started my whole prairie growing was Prairie Moon Nursery. Prairie Moon in Winona, Minnesota. And Ion Exchange, ION, Ion Exchange in Harpers Ferry, Iowa. The fellow that owns it used to work at Prairie Moon. See, what Prairie Moon doesn't offer that Ion does, Ion has plugs, meaning you could buy the little plugs we're all used to seeing. Prairie Moon, you're going to order them bare root, and they're just as good. Depends on, I like bare root. They'll come in, they're usually $3 a piece. Maybe you'll order three or more, and they'll have a price discount. But you'll get an echinacea, and the roots will be this long, as thick as a pencil. And the crown's up here, you know, and you go ahead and plant them. Everything I ever planted from a bare root, poof, away it goes. If I have good, well-drained soil.
Where is your email?
It's a very last frame, all the way to the back, all the way to the
That's where I was
bottom. There we go. Yeah, that one. So there's my contact info. So just email me if you want to get plants.
And I'll put it on the Eco Iowa City website too, so
Yeah.
for some reason you don't get it.
Yeah. Oh, and while we're here too, go ahead and put that on slide so I can go up and just tease them a little bit with what they aren't going to be able to have time to see today.
There were like 4,000 more slides here.
Oh, I know. Somebody asked about edible landscaping. I wanted to show him that. You guys into aronia berries? You guys hearing about aronias?
Did you go back? I didn't go back.
That's funny.
Bob, could you also mention we're a library and we have lots of books about these things?
Oh yeah, definitely. You know, your local library. Come on, guys. Are you guys carrying? I don't know. This will be good because you can start carrying this. It's called Gardening with Wildflowers. Susan Wasowski and her husband, can't think of his name. It's a great book called Gardening with Wildflowers. She's from Texas, but we can relate to a lot of what she's talking about. Good stuff in there. So I think you also asked me about a reference too. It's called Gardening with Wildflowers. Oh, I said Susie, it's Sally. Sally W.A. Wasowski. S-O-W-S-K-I, right? You know the computer will correct you. Did you mean?
Did you want to show something else?
Well, I wanted to go up. Did you guys get that? Now, aronia berries, you guys, I was in Ottumwa last month. There's that clove currant I was telling you about. So there's the flowers that smell deliciously like spicy cloves, just wonderful scent. Will smell up your whole backyard. There it is in bloom. Unfortunately, like a fool, I didn't take a picture of the fruit, but it does get black fruit. There's the service berry. This is one called Regent, and they look like blueberries, don't they? And you know dark purple fruits are high in antioxidants, right? Very good for you. This thing is chock full of calcium, chock full of vitamins A and C. Very, very good for you. And if you don't get to them, the birds love them. but Regent's a shorter one. Regent's only about 4 to 5 feet, and just about ready to bloom. And I've gotten 2 pies off of one plant before. And for you pie makers, how many cups is that?
6.
About 8.
Six.
She does 6. I did 8. I did 4 cups per pie. Oh, and Wahoo you were asking about too. There's one of my favorite native shrubs, the Wahoo. Yahoo for the Wahoo. Look at that. That's our native burning bush. Why isn't that in landscapes?
The burning bush actually has berries,
Yeah.
and you can eat them.
You may be thinking of the burning bush that everybody plants from the garden center. That's a European native. This is a native burning bush.
This is a round branch, it isn't got the...
Right. The wings.
furrows on it.
Right.
Do you like it better than the other one that you said was...
The Carnouse.
Yeah,
I do.
I like the plain Wahoo.
Yep, I do. 1, because it's native. I'm just a sucker for that. And 2, it's just got a story to tell. I'm not from Mongolia. I don't know the story to tell with that Carnouse. This one, the bark is not a very good shot, but the Indians called it ghost walking stick. And out in the woods, when you're walking around, these lichens attach themselves much like that yellowwood, making it look ghostly gray. So it was a walking stick. No.
That's all over our service berry.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt them. No.
We called it spindleberry in England.
Yes, that's another name. The European version exactly would be spindleberry.
You have seedlings underneath it usually.
Underneath that Carnouse flower.
Oh, underneath
Oh, the Wahoo.
the Wahoo often will have seedlings.
Yeah, yeah,
The birds haven't eaten everything.
exactly. Did we get all the questions, or is there more?
We have 1 more minute, so could you just quickly tell us, when do you cut sand love grass, in the spring or fall?
In the spring,
And how much?
down to the ground. Pretty much any grass dies to the ground. Its growing points are below the ground. So don't cut back your ornamental grass and leave these 1.5 tails. Cut it to the ground, because then that green growth has to come through all that brown.
You have to have the sunshine get into the center.
Right. I mean, if we could all burn them, that'd be the best thing to do. And I'll do little mini prairie burns with my little blue stems. It's amazing the difference. That dark soot absorbing that heat, they'll green up twice as fast as one that isn't burned. It's amazing.
Okay, that's it.
Were you going to mention something about the aronia berry and Ottumwa you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say a speaker, Harlan Hammernick from Bluebird, was invited to speak on the aronia berry there at Ottumwa, and everybody was so interested in it. It's being hailed as the new superfruit. There's going to be a lot of information online, but very high in antioxidants. What I was going to say was you can grow it yourself. You don't have to go buy the juice. I'm going to wait because I'm cheap. I'm going to buy the bush, and I've eaten them raw. It's nothing exciting. But I've been told freeze them, and then when you pull them out of the freezer, that's broken down some of that starch. They're high in tannins, so it's much more palatable. And if they say eat 6 a day, they've had people. I don't want to give all these cure-all things, but they cite some of the things that have happened to people that have benefited from from doing it, back pain relief.
We're going to say goodbye to our television audience, but we'll let Bob talk a little bit more. Thank you very
Thanks.
much.